Okay. Hello, welcome to this webinar about South Yorkshire Community Foundation's COVID-19 Response and Recovery Grant. We're going to go through a number of different things, looking at the basics of how you apply for a grant, tell you a little bit about SYCF, South Yorkshire's Community Foundation, why we're running the webinar, and then talking a bit about the grant. So it's the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Grant. So it covers both immediate responses to communities and helping them, but also for groups to try and get back on their feet and try and help communities recover as well. We'll talk about the grant, we'll explain how the process works. So there's some basic things you need to be aware of for any grant. So if there's people looking at this who aren't familiar with applying for grants, this is what you need to think about. And it applies to this particular grant, but it applies to any others that you might be looking for. You need to have a bank account in the name of the group. And you need to have some form of constitution. Now, if you're a little community group, you'll have a constitution. You might be a social enterprise that's got that's a company, community interest company or company limited by guarantee. You might be a charity, but you need to have some form of formal structure. You also need to have at least 3 unrelated committee members. Any sort of grant scheme, it won't look at individuals, it wants to see that there's a group there, so it needs to be at least 3 people. You need to decide what it is you want to fund, and you need to be specific about that. So this is what you ask the funder for, and this is what the funder calls their project. So it could be a piece of equipment, it could be a particular event, it could be a range of activities. But it's important that you can say specifically what it is. You don't just say, this is what we do as a group, please fund us. You need to be able to say, right, we want to run these activities. In order to do that, perhaps we need a sessional worker, perhaps we need some premises, perhaps we need some equipment. So you can set out what your project is. You need to say how much it will cost. Funders want you to ask for specific amounts. They'll have different rules about whether they want to see a quote or whether they're happy to just take your word for how much something costs. But you need to be able to say what the prices are. So if you're paying a sessional worker, how much do they charge? If you're using premises, what's the rent? If you're buying a laptop, how much it will cost? You need to be able to see the specific amounts. Apart from anything else, funders will often have a limit as to how much they'll give. So you need to make sure that you're not asking for too much. A really crucial thing, and this is really developed over the last few years, is to be able to say how your project is going to help people. They want to know, the funders, what good their money will do, not just what bills it will pay. So they want to hear you talking about, we want to run a befriending scheme. We want to be able to keep in touch with people that are isolated. In order to do that, we need to buy a laptop or we need to pay volunteer expenses. But it's really important. Funders will say, we want to give money in order to improve people's well-being, in order to reduce isolation. So it's important that you can say that this is what your project will actually do, and then tell them the things that you need to buy in order to be able to do it. So South Yorkshire Community Foundation, SYCF, this is the organisation that's got this particular grant. It's been around 34 years, and as you can see, it's given out a lot of money in that time. The way it does that is through an endowment where they collect donations from people. This money is invested, and then the interest and the dividends that come from that are given out each year as grants. So the beauty of that is the money is always going to be there. There's always going to be money given out. They also look after money for other people and give grants out, and this particular one we're talking about today is money that's coming from elsewhere, but the foundation basically knows how to get applications in, knows how to look at them, so it will assess money for this. So it's part of the UK Foundations Network, so we're a national body, and if you're not from South Yorkshire when you're looking at this, you can find out from UK Foundations where your nearest foundation might be. We've got a group of trustees from private sector, from public sector, from voluntary sector, who look after the organisation. So we're locally based, and we want to be able to give grants out to locally based organisations as well. So COVID-19, it's obviously had an absolutely massive impact on everybody's lives. But what's been particularly noticeable, I think, recently is that already disadvantaged communities seem to be suffering actually worse than others. So BAME communities, people with disabilities, older people, all seem to be struggling particularly. So you can see some of the information here. 2/3 of those dying from COVID-19 have been disabled. So it's bad, but it seems to be particularly bad for those who are already having it a bit rough. And that's why we want to make sure we've got funds that can help communities make improvements. And we want to make sure that we're reaching those who are particularly in need of support. So the fund is open to anybody, any kind of group doing any kind of activity that's helping people suffering from the pandemic can apply. But we want to make sure that people who are, perhaps at particular disadvantage can actually make an application. So we're making this webinar available so that anybody can just sit and listen to it, get a feel for how it works, and hopefully then are able to make an application and able to actually help out their communities. So we've run webinars that have been particularly targeting BAME communities and disability organisations. And what we've got here now is a recording with a BSL interpreter that hopefully will make the information accessible to anybody who's interested. So the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Grant, this has changed a bit from the last few weeks. When the grant first started, it was simply about immediate responses to the pandemic. So it was helping people meet the immediate needs of their local community, the absolute basics of keeping people fed and keeping people, collecting prescriptions, doing shopping, all this sorts of thing. So there's a lot of money's been given out to cover that already. But I think we're now ready for sort of the second stage. So it's recovering, getting things back up and running, helping sessions, perhaps meetings start up again in a way that's safe and is okay for people. So there's two different bits to the grant. There's responding and there's recovering. And if you want to do something that covers both of those, you can apply for that. Or if you're simply looking at one particular aspect, then you can apply for that as well. You can come back to this grant. If you've had a grant previously, then you can apply again if there's more work that you want to do. So there's £5,000 available for each aspect of it. So you can, if you want to, apply for £5,000 for response activities and £5,000 for recovery activities. So there is potentially £10,000 available for each organisation. It's open now. Decisions take about 4 weeks, which is not too bad in terms of timescale. I give advice generally about funding, and before the pandemic, there were plenty of people that took 3 months to make decisions. Obviously, things are really urgent, particularly at the start of this, so it's good that people are able to respond a bit quicker. So 4 weeks is a decent amount of time. The money has to be spent by the end of January. next year. So this is quite an important aspect. It's fairly short-term funding. And what we're finding with a lot of funders that are supporting pandemic activities is that they are only looking at money for a few months. So if you want to plan longer term, you need to wait until things change. Now, the Community Foundation does have other grant schemes that are still running. So there are other possibilities if you're looking for something that's taking you a bit beyond that. But for this particular fund, the money's there, but up until the end of January. So priorities. Priority will be given to organisations providing support to the most vulnerable. So there's a list there which covers, I think, pretty much everybody. In most communities, people look at older people, people with disabilities, mental health needs, low incomes, families with young children, Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. We want to hear if you're working particularly with any one of those communities or if it's a mixture of those. But it is a key thing that the fund is here and is available to work with people who are particularly disadvantaged and isolated. So what sort of things can be funded? For the response, as I said, this is very much sort of immediate support for people. So the food parcels, medicines, befriending services, anything that support vulnerable people, information, advice, counselling. So we've had grants that have come in from food banks, we've had grants from people that are distributing food parcels, or that have perhaps worked with, for example, people with learning disabilities who can no longer go out and meet them, but are now doing online contact sessions so that people can still keep in touch. So basically anything that's alleviating people's immediate needs that have cropped up as a result of the pandemic and of lockdown. The recovery activities is basically getting things back up and running. So it might be that you can start activities, but you need to do them a bit differently, and that's going to cost. So providing PPE, providing sanitizing equipment, perhaps needing a larger room or doing somewhere in different premises, needing more equipment. So anything that allows you to get activities sort of back up and running and be able to sort of to meet the needs of the community again. Maintaining vital community services where their income has been lost. I mean, if you're simply carrying on, but you need to cover the costs of running the building, running activities, then that's fine. Now, there is a gap here, and there's a gap in a lot of funders for this, in that if people have had to close down, but have still got costs in terms of paying for utilities or rent or whatever, this won't cover that, and unfortunately there isn't really much out there that will. But provided you're doing something in terms of activities, then this is going to be okay. You can say, well, we're running a very basic service at the moment and we need to use the building as the base for that, so it'll cover the costs of the building. So have a think about what you're doing, what's response and what's recovery, because as I say, there's two different aspects to the fund, and you can apply for one or both. So what sort of costs will it cover? Pretty much anything really. Capital costs, so if you needed to buy equipment, or perhaps if you needed to make slight alterations to a building layout. Revenue costs, including staffing, so if you need to pay staff costs or sessional workers, also volunteer expenses, the basic bills of rent, it will cover those sorts of things. It'll help you build the capacity of your organisation, so if people need to learn how to use Zoom or how to do things differently, it'll pay for training. It'll cover the core costs, as I said, to run your organisation, to actually keep things going. So provided you can say, we need to pay these bills in order to keep the organisation going and deliver these activities, then you're going to be okay. Help you explore and adapt to new ways of working. So if you're looking at checking out perhaps different use of IT, different ways of talking to people, different ways of meeting people. Provide time and resources to assist with working collaboration with new partners. I think that can be really interesting if you find that there's another organisation close to you that can do something similar, where if you work together, you're actually able to offer a better service. Then potentially, you know, there's money here to pay for staff time to look at that, or to look at ways of working together. And again, 31st of January is the deadline, so all money has to be spent by then. So who can apply? Basically, you need to be a not-for-profit organisation. And as I've mentioned in the sort of the general introduction, you need to have a governing document, so a constitution or memorandum of association. You need a board or management committee of at least 3 unrelated people. You need a bank account in the name of the group with at least 2 unrelated signatories, and be locally based and locally led and run. So community groups with a constitution can apply, charities can apply, charitable incorporated organisations can apply. Now, this is the interesting bit. Normally, the Community Foundation doesn't fund community interest companies, and it doesn't fund companies where directors are paid. Now, that's the rules for the Community Foundation's money, but this isn't their money. This is money from the National Emergencies Trust. And what they say is, we will fund community interest companies. So if that's you and you've previously looked at the foundation and thought, right, we can't apply for that, you can apply for this one. It's a different fund, so different rules apply. There's been a bit of discussion in the early stages of the pandemic about what they call mutual aid groups, which is where just a group of people in a neighbourhood got together and said, right, we're going to sort this. We're going to get the prescriptions, we're going to deliver food. So if you've not got a bank account or a constitution and you're just an informal group, it's still possible to get your activities funded, but it needs to go through an established organisation. So is there a local tenants and residents association? Is there a local community centre? If there is, perhaps talk to them, and they could potentially apply for money which could then pay for the costs of you running the activities. So we want to make sure the money gets out as widely as possible. And we know there's a lot of people that have just got up and running and basically done things within their community without worrying too much about the admin that's behind it. But if you're needing funding for the activities, then there are ways and means of getting through that. So the application process, it's online. So if you go to the South Yorkshire's Community Foundation website, it gives you a bit more information about the fund, and it also gives you a link so that you can apply. Check the guidance. You know, we've been fairly comprehensive here in telling you who's eligible and what you can get, but make sure you do fit. It's always important to read through and make sure there's no things that are going to trip you up. And then you go to the online form. Now, there's an important little point here. If you can't complete the form online, get in touch with the grants team and they will have a discussion with you about how to get the information. Like I said earlier on, we want to make sure that this is an accessible process and that the people that need the money most can get it. So if online isn't for you, then we'll try and find ways around it. It does make it a much simpler process for us, so it allows us to process the applications much more quickly, which is why we prefer to do it that way. But we're open to discussions if people need to do it a different way. It sounds really silly, but read the stuff. Read the introduction. Make sure you think, yes, this is definitely what we want to do. And what you then do is you give them your email address, you send that in, and then by return you'll get a link which will take you to the application form. So what do you need to put on the application form? If you've tried the foundation before, you'll be pleasantly surprised that this one is a lot simpler. Doesn't ask quite as many questions. We need to know contact details, obviously, so information about you and the organisation. We want to know what the organisation normally does. So, you know, what were your usual activities before the pandemic? And if you haven't had a grant from us before, we ask for a referee. So somebody who knows your organisation but isn't part of it and can vouch for you. So it might be somebody in the community centre where you hire a room, or a local councillor or a local council officer who helps you. So anybody that can say, yes, I do know this organisation, they are who they say they are. Sadly, you know, when you've got money available in schemes like this, there will be people who try and con money out of you. So we do have to be careful, and asking for a referee is one of the safeguards to make sure that we're giving money to organisations who actually are doing the work. So if you're asking for money for response, so the immediate looking after people's needs, then this is what we want to know. So how you're responding to the needs of the community, how you know your community needs this activity. This is really important, because you as an organisation might have a bright idea about what you want to do, and then actually nobody takes part in it because nobody else thinks it's a good idea. So we want to see that you've checked out with people. Do you think this would be a good idea? Do you think this would work? And also how you're linking into the wider COVID-19 response. There's obviously lots of organisations across the city, across South Yorkshire, doing all sorts of things, and we want to know that you've spoken to them. So if you're delivering food parcels and there's a food bank nearby, how are you linking in? It might be that you work really well together, because some people can come out and collect the food and some can't. So you can deliver it where people can't get to the food bank. But we want to make sure that you're not just doing your own little thing without looking around. And, you know, the worst thing is we give money to you as an organisation and find that there's somebody already doing it, and actually you end up duplicating the services. So we want to know that you checked out who else there is out there and what they're doing. If you're looking at recovery activities, then some different questions. So how your organisation is re-establishing or maintaining its services. So what are you doing differently now as a result of the pandemic that allows you to keep going? Again, making sure that the community does need your organisation, that you've got people that want to come to your activities or want to be involved. We want to know how it's affected your organisation's funding. As I mentioned, provided you're still doing activities, we will look at covering some of the basic costs of an organisation. So if you've lost a lot of income from groups not operating, if your fundraising's been cut short, just tell us how that's made a difference, and how you're working with others or plan to in the future. Again, showing that you're linking in with other people. We want to know the budget. We want to know what the cost is. So if you've got something that's costing £5,000, it's fine to ask us for £5,000. Equally, if you've got something that costs 10 and you're asking us for 5 and you can get 5,000 from elsewhere, you know, that's fine. So tell us how that works. You know, you won't be penalised for saying we've got some other money coming in, but we want to know how much you need, how much you've already got, how much else is coming in, and also what will happen if you don't raise the full amount. You know, if it's simply a case of we'll not be able to deliver as many food parcels, that's one thing. But if it's a case of, well, if we don't get this piece of equipment, we can't run the activity, it's important that we know that. And we ask for a fairly basic budget breakdown of what's staffing costs or equipment or expenses. One crucial thing when you're filling out the form is that the numbers must add up. And if they don't, it won't let you submit the form. So if you say this project is going to cost £6,000 and we're asking you for £5,000, and you then give a budget breakdown that only comes to £5,000, it won't let you submit. It will say, hang on, you said it was going to cost 6,000, so tell us where the other 1,000 is coming from. We get a lot of calls from people saying it won't let me submit, and it's always a case of, right, just make sure all of the numbers are in there and all of the numbers add up. Right, we also want to know what difference you're going to make. There's a checklist, a drop-down list basically of, you know, are you going to improve people's mental health? Are you going to improve people's well-being, reduce isolation? So you pick which of those you think is going to be suitable. Who will benefit? Is it aimed generally at the community? Is it aimed at a particular age group or a particular, you know, group of people in terms of people with disability, particular ethnic groups? So tell us who will benefit. This is as much for our information as it is part of the assessment. You know, if you're working generally with the community, that's fine, but it's useful for us to know how many projects are working with disability groups or working with older people. But it's basically a list of tick boxes that you need to go through. We need to know the bank details, so tell us the bank details, the sort code and the account and who the signatories are. You need to confirm that you've got appropriate safeguarding policies in place. We don't ask to see them, but we do ask you to confirm that you're working safely and appropriately with people. Information you need to send in, and you can either attach it electronically to the application or you can actually post it in if you need to do that. So we need to see the governing document, so your constitution or your memorandum and articles. We need to see your annual accounts. It gives us a useful picture of what money is spent, and we need to see a bank statement. And a very simple reason for that is we've asked you above to tell us the account number and sort code, and if we've got a copy of the bank statement, we can make sure that you've got the numbers right. We can also see that that is the account for the group. Again, part of our checks to make sure that money's going to the right place. And then there's a declaration, various terms and conditions where you obviously agree to spend the money as you've said. So when you're filling it out online, don't forget to save it as you go along. If you do brilliant answers to all of the questions and then simply close it and think, oh, I'll finish that later, it won't have saved it, I'm afraid. You have to click the save button at the end, and then you can go along at another time and finish it, you know, finish it off. When you're happy with it, you click submit, and if you've done the job right, it will submit it. If you haven't, as I mentioned with the money, it won't submit. And unhelpfully, it doesn't tell you specifically what you've got wrong. But firstly, check the numbers, make sure that they all add up in terms of how much you need from us and how much you said it's all going to cost. And also just check the questions. Where there's a red bar at the side of one of the question boxes, it means you must answer that question. So if you've missed any out, then just go back through and make sure you've put the information in. And then if you're struggling, let us know, we'll have a look at it for you. So as I say, decisions take about 4 weeks. We'll make a backs payment. So once we've said, yes, we like it, it'll only be a matter of a few days before the money gets to you. We really want to see how the activity's gone. So pictures, videos, case studies, it's really useful for us to be able to say, look, the money's being spent well. And it's also really nice to see that projects have worked and projects have made a difference to their community. So anything you can share with us, that's really good. And then there is a formal end of grant report, not massively complicated, just ask you to confirm that the money's been spent as you've said, which you do once the activity's finished. So that's it. If you've got any specific queries about the fund itself, you can email the Foundation Grants team. So that's grants@sycf.org.uk. If you've got any general funding inquiries, we can talk to you about this particular grant scheme or what other grant schemes might be suitable for you as well. And that's a different email address, advice@syfab.org.uk. So please don't forget, the money is there. We're finding that most decent applications are getting funded, so it's not one of these that's very competitive. There's obviously a lot of demand out there, so it's really important that people do what they can to get the money out there to the groups that can support communities at this time. Okay, thank you. We hope to hear from you.